First, I want to thank Rabbi Schreier for his generous and somewhat exaggerated introduction. And it is a simcha and a privilege to be here. I have many fond memories from this community. We've known each other for quite a while, for quite a few years, but this morning is really a very special event. As Rabbi Schreier noted, one of the most important institutions in Beis Yisrael is a Beis Din. And the Beis Din has many functions and many different realms of responsibility beyond the courts in modern society. Because the Beis Din bears responsibility not only in dealing justice bein odom lachaveroi, also bein odom lamokaim. The modern court deals with crime, doesn't deal with sin. But the responsibility of a Beis Din originally was not only l'aseh tzedakah u'mishpat, but also lahamid et hadat al tila, Beis Din makin v'yonshin. We live in a changing world. There no longer is a Beis Mikdash in Yerushalayim. And we also don't have the Beis Din HaGadol in Lishkas HaGazis in Yerushalayim. But still, Beis Din is central and essential to every Jewish community. To my dismay, many people prefer to turn to secular courts when they have monetary disputes. It is a phenomenon that cannot and should not be justified, but it needs to be understood, because you can't fight something if you don't understand it. And sometimes we could understand people that prefer to turn to secular courts. I think most people know that that is a very harsh transgression. And the language the Shulchan Aruch uses, following the footsteps of the Rambam, against those that turn to secular courts is unparalleled. Nowhere does the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch use such harsh language. Meirem yad b'toires Moshe, koifer be'ikar, and people still turn to secular courts because by many there is some fundamental mistrust in the Beis Din system. Most of the times unjustified, but once again, understandable. People go to Beis Din, they don't know what to expect. And not all of Botei Din conduct their proceedings in a proper manner. It is not uncommon for one party to learn to his chagrin that a dayan spoke personally with another party. So in order to see to it that people turn to Botei Din and not the secular courts, we need proper Botei Din. The Yonim that try to rise to the standards of the Rambam and Perek Beis Mehilchos Sanhedrin. Maybe very few could really achieve those standards, but we need to try, and we need to try to emulate the Dayanim and the giants of yore. So for me, it is a privilege and a schus to partake in this morning, which is a celebration of the Beis Din of America, and the appointment of Rabbi Willig to be the Av Beis Din. I've known Rabbi Willig for many years, and he is a paragon, really an immense Talmud Chacham, a person of vast wisdom, sensitivity, and I think Ra'ui hu ra'oisa itztala v'keser Torah cholam masai. So I don't think Rabbi Willig is here. Is he here with us this morning? I did not see him, but I don't want to use the words congratulations. It's not a Jewish expression, but my brochus, my heartfelt brochus, and I wish for Rabbi Willig and for the Beis Din. He should have many, many, many wonderful years standing at the head of this great institution. And I was asked this morning to speak about the concept of pshora, and I was told that most of the people gathered into this room are lawyers. Is that so? Some of the people I know are rabbonim and dayanim. I hope there are some lawyers in our audience this morning, but regardless, it's a fascinating sugya. So when should Beis Din try to convince the parties to go for a pshora? And at what stage of the proceedings is that permissible? The source of the sugya is in Sanhedrin Daf Vav. Reb Shimon ben Manasseh maintains that pshora is legitimate only up to the stage in which the Beis Din yodeya lahechan hadin noteh. Beis Din should recommend to parties, maybe you want to work out a compromise, instead of asking the Beis Din to go for the approach of Yikov Din et Hahar. But if Beis Din already has the feeling, they heard both parties, and the Beis Din has the feeling who is right and who is wrong, they can no longer recommend the pshara. But the Chachamim maintain Kol hazman shelo nigmar hadin, until the verdict is finally passed, pshara is legitimate and should be recommended. And that is the halacha in Shulchan Aruch, Seven Yud Beis, Siv Beis. Actually, there are two different sifim in Shulchan Aruch which relate to pshara. Seven Yud and Choshe Mishpat Siv Aleph, Seven Yud Beis, Siv Beis. And in Seven Yud Siv Aleph, Shulchan Aruch writes, Kol ha-moineya atzmoi min hadin, moineya mimeno gezel eva v'shavua shav. Mazal tov, Rabbi Willig. So I am not in charge here. I'm just a guest, but the best of my humble understanding, you should be sitting up here. Please. I want company up here. It's not comfortable to be up here alone. So you came just in time after I finished speaking about you. So in Siman Yud, the Shulchan Aruch says, Kol ha-maneya atzmoi min hadin, moineya mimeno. Good morning, Rabbi Weiss. I didn't notice that you're here, so I apologize. Kol ha-maneya atzmoi min hadin, moineya mimeno eva v'gezel v'shavua shav. And the Sma explains, what do you mean, Kol ha-maneya atzmoi min hadin? Just run away from Beis Din? No. Recommend pshora. Siman Yud Beis Siv Beis, Shulchan Aruch says, Kol Beis Din she'oise pshora tamid, arei ze mishubach. Does that mean that Beis Din always needs to try to impose pshora or recommend pshora? Sma, Siman Yud Beis, Siv Koten Vav, when the Shulchan Aruch says arei ze mishubach, and the beginning of the sif is when the parties walk into the Beis Din room, the Beis Din needs to ask the parties, do you prefer din or would you like pshora? So the Shulchan Aruch seems to say they just need to be given options without any influence or recommendation or trying to pressure them one way or the other. They just need to know that they have two options. Imle din, imle pshora. But the Sma's interpretation is that no, we should recommend pshora. And that is also the opinion of the Shach and Siv Koten Gimel. The Taz says no, they should be given the options, not beyond that. And that is also the opinion of the Tumim, Rabbi Yonis Elayvish and Purim, Siv Koten Daled. And that is what the Taz quotes from the Maharal. However, both sources in Shulchan Aruch that I quoted seem to indicate, yes, we should always try to go for a pshora and not say Yikob Adin Es Hahar. The Mechilta in Pashas Mishpotim, and I'm quoting the Lashon of the Mechilta, Yorei Elokim Oisim Pshore Bedin. So obviously Chazal, even though they were giants of Torah, were very afraid of Asiyas Din. And that is why the Mechilta says, people that have Yiras Hashem should try to refrain from Din and recommend Pshara. We find the same in the Mashon, Sanhedrin, Avavam, and Beis. The Avnei Nezer had somewhat of a split personality in the most positive way. He was the founder of a Hasidic dynasty. He was the Sachach of a Rebbe. He was also one of the greatest Gedolim of his time, an amazing Ilui. And the Avnei Nezer writes, in my life, I never paskin al bidin, and I always recommended and try to bring the parties to a pshara. However, we really need to think whether this is so strongly to be recommended, especially in our times. And I think a basin there will always try to achieve a pshara. Nivnu oisei resha. And people might take advantage. You claim a person, you know that your claim is ridiculous, you know it's a lie, and you trust, well, I'll get something out of it. The basin will recommend a pshara, and we are encouraging wrongdoing. So I think it is only in specific cases in which pshara is justified. In the vast majority of cases, Beis Din needs to paskin in accordance to Choshen Mishpat. And one of the reasons that drive people to secular courts is the assumption in Beis Din, they will not really do justice. They will always try to work out the pshara, and to my detriment if you really think you're right. So I think we live in a changing world in many different areas and many different aspects, and in this aspect as well. When people were to me mistake, and they didn't come to Beis Din unless there actually was some basis for a claim, maybe pshara should be recommended. I think in our day and age, the primary goal of a Beis Din is lasos tzedek u'mishpat, and to paskin. There are so many boti din in which the Yoram are not really versed in Choshen Mishpat at all. And the reason they dare to sit in Beis Din is because, well, we're not learning Choshen Mishpat anyway. We're not paskening up Yalach anyway. We just try to work out some compromise. All you need is some common sense. And sometimes even that ingredient is lacking. But the feeling that all we need to do is just work out a pshara is a mistake. And it is one of the factors that brings people to go to secular court. And people also take advantage of the system. And a person knows, I don't really have any sound claim, but probably I'll get something out of it because the person will try to work out a pshara. And therefore, I think that the primary duty of Boti Din in our day and age, they need to be versed in Choshen Mishpat, they need to be versed in Eben Ezer, they need to know the subject material, and they need to paskin according to Choshen Mishpat and in accordance to halacha. So when is pshara justified? So I want to specify three different areas and three different scenarios in which pshara is the right course of action. Shuvas HaRashim and Klal Kuf Zayim Siman Vav. The Rosh appears more than once in the Shuvas, but probably that is the most important Shuva, and it is quoted in Siman Yud Beis Sif Hei in Choshen Mishpat. Ein hadayonim rishoim lehistalek min hadin. And if a case comes before Beis Din, and Beis Din really is in doubt, and they don't really know what to make of it, and they can't decide who is right and who is wrong. Sometimes the doubt is based on halachic doubt, sfeikis and halacha. Sometimes they can't really decide who speaks truth and who is not truthful. And they can't really decide What has transpired between the two parties? So, is a Beis Din entitled to say, I don't know, and therefore, lestalik minaden. Maybe al pi halacha that would be an option. The other option would be hamotzim mechaveri olav haraya, and the muhzik is the one that goes home happy, and the Rosh says no, because the Beis Din has a dual duty, not only mishpat, but also lasei shalom ba'olam, and to enhance peace and harmony. So when people come to Beis Din in discord and they have a monetary dispute, they're supposed to walk out of the Beis Din when Beis Din decides and decrees, and the tafka of the Beis Din is also lasei shalom ba'olam, and to bring peace and harmony and quiet into our communities, and therefore the Beis Din eino rashai lehistalek min hadin, and in that case, he needs to try to achieve a pshara. We find the same reasoning in Shuvas Baz, and that Baz was a generation younger than the Rosh. In Shuvas Baz, Chelik Dalet Simen Nun Dalet, that Baz says, what is the Beis Din supposed to do if he cannot decide? He's supposed to turn to a greater Beis Din than he is and ask the counsel of others, or speak to Talmidei Chachamim and try to understand and reach a verdict. And if he still cannot do so, if it's a Safek Gomer, he should do a Pshara, V'asiso hayosha v'hatoiv. Chazal do not base the concept of Pshara on the Pasuk V'asiso hayosha v'hatoiv. There are various different halachas that Chazal do base on V'asiso hayosha v'hatoiv. For instance, Dina de Bar Metzah, Shuma Hadra Li'olam. These are sugyas and Bava Mitzvah. But the Radbaz alludes Pshara to V'osiso hayosha v'hatoiv. So when Beis Din cannot really decide, and Beis Din is in doubt, the Rosh and the Shuvas Radbaz say, in that case, Pshara is recommended. Shavus Yankov goes a step further. Chelik Beisim and Kuf Memhei, and the Shavus Yankov was one of the great poskim going back more than 300 years. And he says sometimes, even if Beis Din does not have a suffix, and they're not in doubt, and if Beis Din feels that paskening al pi choshen mishpat would just cause a deepened rift and machlokes, sometimes lasei shalom is more important than doing justice. And Beis Din in that case has the right to recommend a pshara and even to impose a pshara. That is the Shvus Yankov, Chelik Beis, Simen Kuf, Mem, Hey. Sometimes, and this will sound strange to many people, that I don't think it would sound strange to the esteemed Dayanim sitting on my left, sometimes there is a contradiction between tzedek and mishpat. It could happen. Sometimes if we say, Yikov adin sahar, but we know that the righteous person and the one that was honest in his dealings will lose out, and we are encouraging and supporting wrongdoing. I cannot give examples because they're complex. That what is Beis Din supposed to do when there is an obvious clash between mishpat and yashar? So I quoted the pasuk before, V'osiso hayosher v'hatoiv. Is yosher v'toiv the same? Maybe not always the same. Tzedek and mishpat, are they the same? I think two sides of the same coin, but not always do they coincide. And one of the most important ingredients that is required from a dayan is chush hatzedek, the feeling of what's right and what's wrong, not only being versed in choshen mishpat, but having the feeling what is right and what is wrong, what is evil and what is righteous. And pshara is justified when Mishpat contradicts tzedek. I don't know exactly how to translate mishpat and tzedek. Mishpat is probably justice, ruling. How would you translate tzedek?
Righteousness.
Yeah, righteousness is tzidkus. I don't know whether it's tzedek, but anyway, I'm speaking to Talmidei Chachamim here, and even the left side of this room are Talmidei Chachamim. So everybody knows what mishpat is and what tzedek is, and when mishpat and tzedek do not coincide, Pshara is justified, and this is something that we learn from Chuvas Ma'ari Brona in two different sources, Siman Reish Mem Aleph and Siman Reish Mem Hey. Siman Reish Mem Aleph, he deals with the concept of Groma ben Ezikin, Groma ben Ezikin Potor, and this is somewhat of a problematic concept. So in Shas Chuvas Minchas Osher, I do not remember which volume, and I don't remember which siman, and I am constantly apologizing. I remember many Sforim better than I remember Minchas Osher, and that is for a very simple reason. To me, Minchas Osher is not Gersa di Yankuta. When I was young, Sefer wasn't available, and that is why I remember the Tzais and the Nesivos and some Sefer far better than I remember Minchas Osher. I do remember that I printed a tshuva. I do not remember which volume, don't remember which siman, but I wrote a great arichas about the difference between Garmi and Groma, and I am machmir b'Groma ben Ezikin, broadening the concept of Dina de Garmi, which is Chayiv. But Marie Brona says, by Groma ben Ezikin, a person did something bad, and he very clearly caused loss and damage to another party. But it's Groma. It's indirect, and therefore he is potter. If Beis Din feels it is right, they should impose a pshara. That is Marie Brona Siman Reish Mem Aleph, and Reish Mem Hey, he speaks about Chiyuv L'Tzeis Yedei Shamayim. So Mishpat says, can't force him to pay. But Tzedek says, Chayiv L'Tzeis Yedei Shamayim. It is another case in which pshara is justified. And finally, a totally different concept of pshara, even though Chazal used the same term, pshara. And if we would have time, I would bring many sources. Sometimes we find the same term in Chazal, two different sources, and it means two different things. Not always does the same word have the same meaning. So usually pshara is compromise. And compromise is justified, as I explained, either when we want to achieve harmony or when we want to achieve tzedek. Compromise is justified when Beis Din is in doubt, and it's a suffix. So instead of saying which would cause discord and machloikis, and not always is it doing justice, compromise is recommended. But on all the sources I quoted up to this point, pshara means compromise. Sanhedrin Lamed Beis and Ksubis Sadekei are two sugyas in which pshara does not really mean compromise based on any of the principles we dealt with in the last half hour. So, tzedek tirdoif, echod ledin ve'echod lepshara. That is the source of pshara in the eyes of Chazal, not Hosis v'yosh l'atoif. Tzedek tirdoif. Why does the pasuk use the same word twice? Echod ledin ve'echod lepshara. So first of all, we learn from this drosha that pshara is not external. Pshara is part of the legitimate process of Beis Din. And pshara is included in the pasuk tzedek tirdoif, echod ledin ve'echod lepshara. And then Chazal give us a surprising case of pshara. Shnei gemalim oilem b'malas beis chorion, or shtei sfinois, two huge ships need to pass the Panama Canal, and each in a different direction, from north to south, from east to west, or from west to east. I don't know the exact geography, but it's, it is from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So, who comes first? 2 camels in a narrow passage in the mountains. If each of them insists on having his way, one of the 2, maybe both, would fall off the cliff and fall to their deaths. So what do? So Chazal say, Tu'una v'she'ena tu'una, the one that carries a heavy burden has the first right to pass, and the one that carries no burden will patiently wait. Is that pshora? And the Meiri says that is only one possibility. One carries a burden and the other does not carry a burden. One has a long way to go and the other is very close to its destination. The one that has a longer way to go has the first right. The Meiri says if one carries a sick person and the other does not, which means we apply common sense and the feeling of what is right and wrong, and he has the first right to pass. Shneim Ta'unim. Both have a long way to go. Both carry a burden. What do we do then? Oisim pshora beineim v'malim sachar zeh lezeh. So, if we have no reason to put one before the other, they both have a long way to go. They both carry a heavy burden. So who has the right to pass first? So we do a pshara and we auction, who is willing to pay. Give me $100 and I'll let you go first. And, we negotiate. So in this Gemara, we have 2 different types of pshara. I think the first one is based on morality, on ethics, like the psharas we mentioned before. But the second one is just bred from necessity. It's not one is right and one is wrong, and it's not really a compromise. It's negotiations. It's a deal. But Chazal call it a pshara. Why is it called a pshara? Because it's not based on din. We don't have any yardstick. We don't have any formula to say who's right. Both are right. Both are wrong to insist that they want the first away. So this is not din, and therefore it is defined as pshora. But it is a pshora that is bred not by morality, by ethics, but rather by necessity, sheer necessity. We can't let them fight it out because both might perish. We need to decide, and therefore if there is no ethical way to decide, then it's a pshara, but not the same nature of pshara as all the others we mentioned. It's just negotiating a deal, and the one that's willing to pay has the right to be first. We find a similar sugi in Ksubis Tzaddik Heyom Midbeis. Person has 2 wives. He married one before the other, and then he sold the field. And Ksubis Usha Goiva Mina Mishua Bodim. So both of these women have a right to go to the lekuchos, to the purchaser, and take the field because their loan comes before his purchase, and they have nechosim mishua bodim. Wife number 1 wrote a shtar to the purchaser, din v'dvorim einli orlecho. That means wife number 1 was moichel her schus, her entitlement to get that field. But the second wife doesn't have a similar document. So lady number 2 takes the field from the purchaser. Now lady number 1 could take it away from lady number 2 because my shivud comes before yours. And now the purchaser could take it back from lady number 1 because we have an agreement. I come before you. So the purchaser comes before wife number 1, wife number 2 comes before the purchaser. Wife number one comes before wife number two. Chayzer cholila, chayzer v'chalila. The Mishnah says chayzer cholila. So what do we do? Oisem pshora v'malan schar zeh lezeh. Who's right? No one is right. No one is wrong. They're all right. So once again, Chazal called this a pshora. This is not a pshora bred by ethics over any moral principle. It's just bred by necessity. This could go on forever. And in Dina Mumanis, they're all right. And therefore, you're going to pay, you're going to need to work this out, some monetary agreement to make everybody happy. And that is once again called pshora. So this is what I have to say about pshora. I just want to go back to the most important point we made today. I think it is a real mistake for Botetin to decide we are actually a body of compromise, of gishur. I think that is one of the reasons people would prefer to go to courts and not to Beis Din. And I think it also will encourage wrongdoing. And therefore, I think we need to give the option to the parties if they want a pshora. That's the Shulchan Aruch, and we can't stray from that. But unless both parties are willing to go for a pshora, our tafkid is try to give a psak based on halacha, based on kosher mishpat. But there are cases, primarily three different scenarios, which I explained, in which pshora would be recommended and pshora would be justified. So I once again, first of all, want to give my humble brachas to Rav Willig. I hope for many, many, many years you will head this Beis Din and be Mekadosh Shem Shemayim. I am a Av Beis Din myself for the past 20 years. And I know sometimes it is an unpleasant job. So there is a saying, it's not a Jewish saying, but kitchens are Jewish. And the saying goes, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And being an Av Beis Din, sometimes you get a lot of heat. Sometimes it's intense heat. But if you conduct your affairs in a fair way and the parties feel they had a say and it was fair, most of people, I believe, would be makabelas adin ba'avo. So many years ago, you know, when I sat in the Beis Din room and the parties came in, and I don't know in advance who the people will be, I said, oy vey, I know one of the people in many years, and he's a very, very tough individual. Very tough individual. I only hoped that he will come out winning. I hoped, but I could do nothing more than hope. As it turned out, he lost entirely, and I did not think there was room for a pshora, for a compromise. The claim was $250,000, and we paskined he needs to pay that money in full. We didn't give him a break, not even 1 cent, and the entire claim was accepted. And the psak was he needs to pay $250,000, and I was convinced that I bought myself an enemy, and he's a tough person. But once again, if this is something you can do, you should never be sitting in a Beis Din. A few months transpired. Erev Rosh Hashanah, I get a phone call. It is my dear friend that I know for so many years. And he says, K'void Harav, I still think I was right. And the Beis Din made a mistake. And I interrupted him. And I said, it might very well be. We're human. Human beings are not always right. And I told him, maybe you were right, but I hope that you saw that the process was fair and we heard you out. So he says, Rebbe, I think I was right, but I want to tell you, I was Makayim, the Psak, Iksovay, Bechol Shoynoi, and I saw tremendous Yata D'Shmaya in my business dealings. And in a few months, I made back the entire sum that I needed to pay. So thank you. I told them so many people called me before Rosh Hashanah to wish me a good Debenture, but your call means more to me than all the others that I got this year. And I really was moved. I was moved, and sometimes when people see that the process is erlich and it's fair, and even though they think I was right, and most people will think they were right. Most people always think they're right. I, Agav, don't think he was right, but I humbly said, maybe we're human, and we all need to recognize our shortcomings. Arrogance is a very bad trait for anyone and for the Yonim as well. But I think most people will be makabalas in Ba'avo. And I know that the Basin of America is one of the best Botedim. And I know that the Yonim is sitting in the basin. So I once again want to wish you Todin din emes la'amito. And if a person is done din emes la'amito, nasa shutav kadosh la'kodesh Baruch Hu Masabashis. And this once again proves the importance and the centrality of Basin. Because Dayan Hadan in Emes Lamita Nasa Shutav LaKodesh Baruch Hu B'Masabashis. So it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I need to rush because in a half hour I'm giving another shir at the Chemet conference. It was a pleasure to be with you this morning, and I look forward to many more opportunities. Shit is Kula Kadeshem Shemaim.